Yes. Okay. Thank you, Christina. So, hello, everyone. Thanks for coming today. Maybe you were here at the sessions last week, maybe not. It's fine either way. Um, Most people have their cameras off. If you have the energy to turn your camera on for a part of the lesson, that's great. And then if you have questions, please just use the raise your hand feature to stop me at any point. And I probably won't pause that much for questions unless you raise your hand. So definitely do that if you want to ask something or get clarification. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, one moment. It's wonderful to see some of you again who are returning from last week. Let's see. Okay. So you should be able to now see my screen that says, here it is again, teaching creative nonfiction. Okay. So today we will talk about creative nonfiction, which is nonfiction, so true stories. The creative aspect means there will be creativity. And this is a text one of my students wrote. It begins, here it is again, be it part of an exam, homework, or an essay. This is one of the most annoying things you have to do as a student. Write down your thoughts. Explain what is happening in this extract or write an essay. It's here once again, and I despise it. So I thought this student actually ended up writing quite a bit during the semester, and they were a strong writer. But here they are complaining and making fun of the task of being told to write an essay. And I thought that was really funny. It reminds me of something I learned when I was studying creative writing, which is if you have a problem with an assignment, sometimes the best strategy is to put that problem into part of your story or part of what you're writing. So instead of avoiding it, actually use it. And I bring that up because if you have, we talked a bit about students who might be resistant to writing or writing is not their favorite part of class. And my suggestion for that is let them express that. Possibly during speaking exercises in English lessons, you already talk a lot about their experience at school, what classes they like, what classes they think they're good at, etc. But you can also do that through writing. So I really encourage you to let students express how they really feel, even if it's more negative. This is going to let them feel really heard, and it can also result in funny texts like this one. Okay, so moving on. Now, what would you say all of these photos have in common? What do you think these pictures have in common? Any guesses?
Excellence.
Excellent. Wonderful guess. They actually have no real connection except for that my students wrote about all of these things. So this brings me to my second tip, which is let your students write about things they are truly interested in. So if that is healthy living and smoothie bowls, or if it's soccer, football, or ancient Egypt, or if they're obsessed with a certain brand of pen, definitely let them write nonfiction texts about these topics. The more they're truly interested, the more they're going to write. So I wanted to share with you a few blog posts that my students wrote, and we studied blogs at the beginning of the year, and it's a really good entry point into nonfiction. So here is one, yet again, talking about school. This is how to get through grammar school without losing your mind through the eyes of a grammar school student. We can skip over where it says drink alcohol. Please ignore that part. And we'll move to the bulk of the blog, which is stop grades from ruining your life. So I actually really love the message of this blog. And despite the fact that it might be a more playful, less serious text, I'm really impressed by how much they wrote. And I think letting them write about their day-to-day experience, their frustration with grades, actually allowed them to get very involved with the writing process and write a longer text. Another few examples, a student wrote about the upcoming election. This was back in the fall. So a student wrote about what it's like to be a voter, as well as some of the candidates that were running at that time. This is in the elections in Czech Republic. And then on the other side, you see this blog about the Owl House, which was a TV show I had never heard of, but the student explained it, and they also used an advanced technique. They used footnotes. You can see there's a couple footnotes here where they were able to add details about what they were writing on. Okay. And two more examples. We have African snails, and then this complex post on the right is book tropes in romance novels. So this was a student who was a big reader. They had read many romance novels, and in addition to rating them, they also picked out what they thought were the most common tropes in these books, and they wrote about those tropes. So my tip for writing blogs is to show your students tons of examples. This is as simple as going online, finding blogs that you like or you think are organized in a good way, and showing those to students, and really focus on the structure of the blog. So we looked at book review blogs that review one book, but we also looked at book review blogs that reviewed and compared a couple of books. So that's probably how this student got this idea. I also showed them a blog about an animal. So that's possibly how this student decided to write about African snails. So the more you show them, the more ideas they're going to have. And looking at the structure then gives them the freedom to choose their own topic, but possibly copy the structure of what you've showed them in class. Okay. Two more. This one is about Tchaikovsky, the composer. And then here is one from the same class about going on a trip. So it's more of a travel blog. And you can, as you know, in mixed ability classes, it's just super important to grade the student on where they're at. Find out early on in the year what their level of writing is, so that you can push them or help them get to the next level based on where they're starting from. Okay, so now we'll talk about a longer form of writing. This would be the personal essay or personal narrative. So these are texts that tell the story of an event that happened in the life of the writer. The terms personal essay or personal narrative are fairly interchangeable. The narrative part means that this text should tell a story that follows a linear structure from beginning to end. The personal part means the story should ideally include elements of reflection. Why do we do these? Well, when done really well at a professional level, these essays can take something as simple as, I used this example before, but you could tell the story of a coffee maker and how it connected you to your grandmother. And this story would help readers connect to the idea of human connection and what it means to have a deep relationship with someone. So at best, these essays take an everyday experience and make it have a more deep or universal meaning. But they don't have to do this. They can also just tell a story from point A to point B. And generally, when you do that, a deeper meaning will emerge naturally. So one of the best ways to do this is to start small. I wouldn't suggest assigning a really long piece of writing first. In the fall, we did 100-word memoirs. This was great to put a word length cap on the writing, so you're not also grading for hours, but you're grading a short exercise that really tells you a lot about how the student thinks and how they write. So how to do this activity. This activity, again, encourage a lot of reading first, and there's a wonderful online resource to help you with the activity. I'm just going to click on it. It will take us there. It's this one. So here you have the New York Times, and they have developed this activity so well that I almost followed their instructions to a T. Let's see if I can close this comment section. Okay, it's a little frozen, but they give you 7 steps to complete this assignment. So we can go to, oh, computer's a little slow. Okay, we can go to their step-by-step guide, which is here, how to write a 100-word narrative. They also did this as a contest. So to encourage completion of the activity, I had my students actually submit their final 100-word memoirs to this online contest. The New York Times, of course, is a US-based newspaper, but they accepted international student submissions. So here we have step 1, reading and analyzing some examples. They have many, many student-written examples on their website. And then step 2 would be to brainstorm ideas for your own. And they have prompts. They have 445 writing prompts for this activity. It's just really incredible. And the prompts are divided by category. So if you want students to focus on animal vocabulary or technology vocabulary, the prompts are in sections by theme, and you can jump to that theme and perhaps give your students a list of those prompts that relate to the topic that you want them to work on. It's really wonderful. Step 3 is finding a small moment. So once you have a broad topic, the students will need to think of a really small moment that they can focus on. And I'll explain that in more detail. And then we get to step 4, experimenting with technique. This is going to be things like dropping your reader right into the action or using dialogue, which you can do even with just 100 words. Step 5, having a powerful final sentence. Step 6 is editing. Because it's so short, every word matters. So those are the 6 steps, but as you can see, there's a lot to read on this website. They give you a very clear guide. I won't go through all of it now. And they also give you a PDF to brainstorm ideas. So this is printable. I will link to it on this PowerPoint. And it's a really great way to start brainstorming. Students can think about times they took a risk, something they regret, an important conversation, etc. So moving back now, how do you actually execute this activity? Whoa, the screen's moving around. Okay. Here also are some examples that I shared with students. This one by Cody in North Carolina is about moving and having to switch schools. So that's very relatable. And you can notice that there's some grammatical errors in this one, like the word me is capitalized, for example. There's no punctuation at the end. And that's actually fine when you're sharing an example, because you can print it out and ask students, can you find any errors in this? And that can be a lesson giving them a chance to edit a text, right? So it's okay if it's not perfect. Theirs won't be perfect the first draft either. That's fine. And this one is from a student who's writing from China. And his 100-word memoir is about catching fish and then being totally surprised when his parents put them on the table for dinner. He was very upset. So again, at best, these memoirs should have a deeper meaning, but they also can just tell a story. If they can do both, that's the number one goal. Here, for example, is a 100-word memoir draft that one of my students wrote. So we'll read it quickly. It is called 4 Are the Limit. When I was in Korea, I quickly noticed that food tends to be slightly spicier there. But nothing so far was too spicy for me, not until one of the last days of my visit, when I made a crucial mistake. When looking through the selection of instant ramen noodles in a convenience store, I laid my eyes upon one with 5 chili peppers on the packaging. I thought to myself, it can't be that bad, can it? And so I went for it. Boiled some water, ready to taste, and I quickly learned that 4 are my limit. Okay, so I really liked this one. I thought it was humorous and it tells a really vivid story. So of course, there are some grammatical issues. I'm not gonna focus on those right now. It's generally not my focus when working on creative writing. So my feedback was more about how can we deepen the message of this if we were to revise it into a longer personal narrative, a longer piece, if we wanted to. I said, if you revise, I'd like to know more about how this small moment relates to your personality or life in general. Are you an adventurous person all the time? Is traveling important to you? Do you want to live in another country when you're older? Did you have culture shock in Korea? These are the kinds of questions you could ask when grading a paper if you wanted a student to revise or to write a longer piece from this exercise. But you don't have to. It's perfectly fine. It's a wonderful exercise as is. And I also marked for them where I would add more. So with this lightning bolt. And I love this sentence. And so I went for it. And possibly after that, because I wouldn't want to mess up their cute ending, I would say maybe you can add some details about yourself there, such as I'm a risk taker, or I love trying new things, if that's true. That was my suggestion. And here's one more example. A lot of students will write about athletics because that's super common for them to be involved in some kind of sport activity. So I won't read this one out loud, but as you can see, it's about athletics and racing. And it's very vivid. They describe physically running in a race, which I love. You can really feel the energy of that moment. The only thing which is louder than the silence is my heartbeat, the student writes. I look around me and I see no one. I am a winner. And I love that they came up with a creative title. Really encourage your students to do that. It can add a lot to a story. So again, my feedback for this was I was so intrigued by the combination of clear love that they depict. I can feel that they're energized by this race, but they also state in the essay, I do not enjoy racing. I have lost all my passion for this sport. And I thought that's really fascinating. There's clearly a tension there between loving and hating something that you've done for 10 years. And I think we can all relate to that. That's universal. It's really beautiful. And if they were to make a longer essay, I would love for them to talk more about that. Okay. So last time, some of you were here last Wednesday, but not all of you. So I just wanted to revise a little bit about narrative story structure because it will apply to nonfiction writing as well. And I will explain how. Oops. Oh. Can everyone see this? Okay. So last week we talked about the hero's journey, and it's a circular story structure, organized like a clock. You do not need to remember or use all of the parts, but I will just now revise the key parts for everyone. So there's the beginning of your story, which is the status quo. For students, if they're writing a personal narrative, this would be maybe a normal school day. Another important part is the call to adventure, or when something in their life changes. Assistance is a character or a person who helps them. This could be a friend or a teacher, someone who helps them through a challenge. The moment of crisis is the most intense part of whatever they are going through on this journey. So yes, it could be their parents getting divorced, or it could be as simple as an argument with a friend. And the return, or when you're moving back towards resolution, is when they've made it through this challenge and they've come out on the other side having learned something new. So this is a really commonly used story structure, especially in movies. But there's other story structures that we can look at. This is a very classic one as well. The exposition would be, again, the status quo. Then you have conflict, something happens. You have rising action, and then a resolution. And students will think of themselves as the protagonist or the main character when writing personal narrative. So it really, you can use a lot of the same strategies as fiction writing, but they themselves are the protagonist. If all of this seems too complex, I found a wonderful, simple one, which is simply beginning, middle, and end. And I really love this diagram. I will link to it so you can print this out and simply have students think about their story in 3 parts. So we've now moved from possibly the most complex structure to the most basic, and they all work really well. And here, I think I'll be able to, well, this webinar is recorded, but I can also email you this slideshow so you can click on these links, and all the resources that I've shared in the past 2 lessons are linked here. Any questions so far? I can't see everyone, but.
I have a question, Celeste.
Yes.
I know it's difficult because it's too of a general question, but do you like working with created worksheets, or do you usually create your own? Because there are, of course, many advantages and disadvantages of both approaches.
That's a good idea. Or good question. Sorry. I like using worksheets that have already been made. I think it saves time and there's a lot of good resources out there. But I generally add examples that I've found or created and written myself. So I think you have to supplement worksheets with additional examples, but I love to use them. Okay, what is next? So we will look at now a few key elements of narrative and a few activities that you can do. So a few key elements are going to be plot, introduction, setting, characters, and conflict. So the plot is, again, what is your story about? You may have students who say, I have no idea what to write about. My life is really boring. I have no ideas. And I can feel this way too. It's really common. And the best way to break out of this is to read examples. So again, I really recommend using this online resource, because not only do they have the 445 prompts, but they're also going to have examples, some written by professional adult writers and then some by students. And the goal is to find a prompt when you're looking through this website. Find one that leads students to think about a small moment. Because we want to, if we have a big funnel of ideas, we want to try to narrow it down. It's going to make the writing process easier. So how do we do that? Well, here is an example. This is part of that list of prompts. I zeroed in on this one. What is your good luck charm? I like this prompt because it leads to storytelling. It leads to thinking about a moment where either you had a lucky bracelet or a lucky pen, or you had an object that you felt had a special power. Or if this never happened to you, you never felt this way, maybe you know someone who does believe in lucky objects or who's maybe superstitious. So it leads to storytelling, which is why I like this prompt. And the example, they have an essay about a figure skater who, I think in the essay, her mother makes her outfits, they're homemade outfits. And so this is really powerful when she's competing. So my idea would be to read an example together and then discuss some of the questions. So in a large group or in smaller groups, discuss this idea, this concept. Do you believe in superstitions, in good luck charms? Have you ever had one? Would you ever have one, etc.? Or even larger than that, do you believe in luck or do you believe more in hard work? How does that play into your life in school or in sports? Students can share ideas and then try to narrow down and select one idea for themselves. And I think I'm repeating myself a bit, but do try to teach the difference between theme and story. So if you're, with this example, the theme of the essay would be the way we invest objects with power, or the difference between luck and hard work. This is more abstract, but the narrative, the story should be even more specific. It should be about a single competition or a test or a single day. If students, it's easier to write an essay about a single day than maybe an essay about your whole life. So try to encourage them to think smaller. Okay, now when you're thinking about starting the essay, brainstorm some ideas. Why did this event matter to you? Can you think of a hook or something to grab the reader? And if the introduction feels really daunting, I sometimes like to have students write it at the end. You can leave a blank space on your paper for the introduction and write it after you've started the essay, because this introduction, we can feel too much pressure for it to be a certain way. So just remind students they can always come back to it and revise it. I have a picture of Sokol here because I had one student who wrote an essay about a gymnastics competition, but her theme was more about how she is interested in the history of Sokol, but how she became interested because she has done gymnastics for 10 years. So the story was about a single competition. The theme was about how this feels important to her because of history. Okay, setting. This is so important. And it's where you're asking all of these W questions: where, when, who. You can give students some sentence stems for describing a setting, but you can also, if you feel students are not writing enough description, I have some activities you can use, and I will share them. So here's one I really love, and this is to practice descriptive writing. So students should bring a photo from home, a printed photo. They can use their phones in a pinch, but if you want them off their phones, then have them somehow print a photo. And they will work with a partner for this activity. So they should swap photos, and they need paper to write with. Now they will look at the photo they've swapped. So they will look at the one they've received, and they will write 5 sentences describing what they think is happening in the photo with as much detail as possible. Is it outdoors, indoors? Is it a party? Is it a sad situation? What expressions are people making? Are there animals in the photo? Is there food? What colors are people wearing? There's so much that they can describe. So try to encourage extensive detail. Then they should also write in a separate section why they think this photo is important to their partner. It can be a total guess, but have them make a guess as to why their partner brought this photo. Then they swap back, and they also give the writing that they wrote to their partner. So the owner of the photo now looks at the writing they have received, and they take some time to read it, and they can evaluate it and make basic corrections. So maybe they read that their photo was interpreted as a birthday party, but in reality, it was a going away party for their best friend, and it was actually really sad for them. So now they write a short text responding to what their partner wrote. They can evaluate the interpretation. Is it true? Do they need to make corrections? And they can address exactly what their partner said. And I found this works really well because students will naturally get quite defensive over their photo. So it's fun actually if it's interpreted incorrectly, because they will feel a need to make those corrections and to say, no, you're wrong. This is what was happening. So they will be encouraged to write because of this. This is basically the same activity, but with a slight variation. You can do it instead of with a photo with an object. I don't have anything on my desk right now. I have a bike tire. I suppose I could use this. So it can be a postcard from a trip they've taken, or if maybe they haven't traveled that much, it could be an object from a relative's house. And again, they should swap their postcards or objects. This time, instead of writing in complete sentences, simply make a word bank. So if I have received this bicycle tire, I should make a circle, and in the circle write as many words as possible that relate to this to me. So, well, I'll start with bike, and I could write outdoors, fun, summer, adventure, tiring. I don't know. You have to just think words. If it's too hard, the students could get more literal and write what it feels like. Okay, this is kind of sticky. It's a black rubber object. They can write anything that connects to what they have. Again, now you will swap back, and the original owner of the object will look at the word bank their partner created, and now they can write about what their object really means to them using those words that were provided for them. So again, this can be really funny because maybe the person I gave this to hates biking, so they wrote boring or difficult. And then I get their word bank and I'm thinking, no, this is my favorite thing to do. So in my writing, I'm going to be more encouraged to express how much I love biking. So I find this working with objects, working in partners can be really generative for students. Any questions? Have any of you worked with object writing before? I remember someone had in the previous class. I don't know if they're here today. I think it was Gabriella and she's not here. But okay. Would any of you try this? A few people. Okay, that's great. So now another dimension of storytelling is character. And have any of you heard the phrase show don't tell? Christina is nodding. Christina, do you know this phrase?
I think so. But I think it means what it says. You don't say explicitly, you just give examples, or you show it by sharing an object or presenting something that characterizes what you don't want to tell explicitly, but you still want to be truthful to that belief or idea.
Yeah, exactly. It is what it says. It means what it says. And it can also mean we want to avoid passive voice, which I mentioned last time. So in order to write vivid stories, we want to try to avoid passive voice. And I'll show an example of this. Oh, here's something I wrote, but it's an imitation of student work. So I said, my primary school teacher was so mean. I was scared of her. She made us do lots of work. I didn't like school. It was so boring. I liked my friends. It was hard. That's actually fine. Honestly, the grammar is correct and it's fine. But there's a lot of passive voice. So passive voice is this verb was. It was so mean. She was mean. It was boring. And that is what I mean by telling. You're just telling someone and it's not showing them a picture. So how can we correct for this? Well, you can ask some questions of your student if they turn something in like this. I encourage you to say, hey, actually, I'd like you to revise this assignment and let's see if we can get a little more detailed, a little deeper. Like, why was she mean? Can you remember one time? Can you describe a specific moment? Asking your students for more description is almost always the solution. And just asking them questions is going to help them think of more details and more interesting ways to say something, to write something. Show anyone. Along with that, last time we spoke about giving students templates. So I found a description of a teacher online, and as we spoke about last week, I removed about 60% of the words. I should have removed even more. You should probably be removing 85%, but I did this morning. So I removed about 60% of the words. And now I have a template with some blanks. And then so you could give a template like this to a student and say, okay, I would like you to write about a teacher you had in primary school by filling in these blanks. I did this exercise myself and ended up with this. So Mrs. R stood on the tetherball court at recess and said, Jake, get over here right now. She blew the whistle that was hanging around her neck, and we all looked in her direction. She had short red hair, blue jeans, and bright lipstick. She seemed powerful and kind of scary, but I came to know her as a nice teacher. She let us read often, but she didn't like when kids spit on the playground. That was cause for detention. Dun, dun, dun. So this is more descriptive. It's going to lead into some kind of story because we have a conflict, right? Something has happened with this character, Jake. The teacher is both nice, but seems scary. There's already enough detail in this for a full story. It's already giving us a conflict and a character description. So yes, again, can be really helpful to give students templates. Another thing I love about characters is writing profiles. So you can have students write profiles. This is a picture of Justin Bieber. Your student, if you don't recognize him, your students will, almost guaranteed. He's kind of now like old news because he's more my generation. So for students 10 years younger, they kind of laugh at him, which is perfect. Uh, I found a really hilarious profile about him from GQ magazine. It's quite long, but with some students, we read a portion of it. And it's very humorous. It has quotations from him, and it tells a really strange story where he had a pet monkey, and it's very interesting. So the idea with this is to have students write about someone. So a profile is a piece about a person. And it works best if it's about one part of that person's life or the thing that's most interesting about them. So you could have students pick a famous person, but try to look at them in a new way. Or they could pick someone that's not famous, but they think should be. They could pick a celebrity that they follow online or have unfollowed. Or they could write about someone they know in real life. And I like to share examples that I've written with students. So I had written a short text about this virtuoso pianist, Yu Wang, and I generally share a portion of it to show like I'm doing this activity with you. And for the last activity for today, have any of you done writing or interviewing students interviewing one another in class? Have you done anything with interviews? Yes, Martina, how did that work? You're on mute. Oh no, Martina, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I am used to Teams, not to the Zoom. So I'm sorry. Okay, so, but I don't make my pupils to write it, yeah? So they just interview each other in short dialogues or something like this. That's it.
Okay, that's excellent. So yes, many of you have possibly already done this as a speaking exercise, and that's great. If you want to do a longer project with it involving writing, as I have noted here, it could add a few days to this lesson because the first day would be just the speaking exercise of interviewing one another. Then they would have another class where they would be taking the notes they made from that interview, writing a rough draft profile of their classmate. And then maybe they would either finish it at home or even have a third in-class day where they could present and share what they wrote. So an interview is a great way to take a speaking exercise and make it into a writing exercise if you want to, if you have the time for that. Again, be sure to read examples of profiles. It could be a celebrity profile or one that you write. They should keep their audience in mind and their purpose in mind, which is to convince other students about the interesting lives of their classmates, which can be challenging if you're working with, say, final year students who have been in the same class for 8 years. But so that can be a challenge. They might say, we know everyone, but you could challenge them to find out something new about one another in the interview process. Or if they're in the middle of their time at gymnasium, maybe it's a little easier. They know each other pretty well, but there's still more to find out. And I have linked to a really great website here that has instructions for this activity. And there's no shame in just following these instructions and using them for this activity. I think these instructions are excellent. They tell you to have an initial interview, then from that initial interview, spend some time writing follow-up questions. So generating more questions, and then meeting for a second interview. And then there's the writing portion. And on this website, there's also wonderful criteria for grading. So some of you mentioned last week, how do you get students to write if they're resistant? Well, you could share with them the grading criteria that you'll be using and say, well, you have to do it. This is how I will assess your work. And I think the grading criteria listed on this website is really excellent. So there is that, and that's all I have for this time. So I'm going to stop the screen share, but we have about 10 minutes. So if anyone has questions or feedback for me, now is the time. I'd love to hear from you. I see just 2 of you. Hello.
If there are no questions, I would be really curious if you could show the grading criteria again, and if maybe some of the teachers could share whether this is something that they find useful or whether it's too complicated or something. Because usually the way when I was at school, I feel like my papers were certainly graded in a very different way. So I find this very interesting, all the rubrics.
Yeah, absolutely. I will share it. And that's a good point, Christina, because when working with Czech teachers, I had a lot of questions about grading. And I think the Czech system is more geared towards grammar than the US system, which I think in many ways is positive. Students finish school with often a very good grasp of grammar, but it can also sometimes be lacking in other aspects of writing. So let's look at the rubric. Okay. I think it's this screen. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it, but you have to scroll down.
Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so they're grading out of 30 points, but I know the Czech system is 1 to 5. So you could simply replace this 30 points with 1. If you want to 1, you need to include these things. And they've separated the rubric into, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 6 categories. So content, what the profile includes, organization, vocabulary, grammar, mechanics, which is a subsection of grammar, in my opinion. That's like punctuation. And then notes. So if you want your students to also submit any notes that they took during the interview process. And you can notice right away that grammar is not the most important thing. I think in the US, there's a heavy focus on content and organization.
Okay, so a person in the chat who was here just for a little bit today says that she uses the rubrics occasionally, but not so many points. So a different, which doesn't matter, I think. It's more about having an outline for the grade, that it actually consists of multiple different layers.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else has ever experimented with any of those rubrics? Or do you just grade the papers completely naturally, given your experience? Well, no one wants to share, but I know from the experience with the English teaching assistants that very often the assistants introduce this approach or encourage the teachers to try it once, and then it can be quite an interesting activity of grading papers together with some of the rubrics. So it's just an option.
I think, Zdenka, did you have a comment?
I just can say that sometimes it's interesting. It's interesting if we concentrate on one rubric and let students evaluate from that point of view or someone other work. So it's quite interesting, and we usually use Maturita stuff. We were trained for Maturita for 20 years. Now we don't have anything, so we still use this rubric. Not these like they are here, but it also helps.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you would use the maturita as that guideline and goal, because that's what students in the Czech Republic are aiming for. That's their goal. It's really important for a lot of students. And in the US, we have, with our college admissions process, a big part of it is writing a personal essay. So we have so much focus and experience in high school writing these personal narratives about a challenge we overcame, or an important moment in our lives where we grew as a person. This is a big, it's very cheesy almost, but it's a big part of the US system, is this essay writing. So it's really interesting how the school systems are each preparing students for what they need to go on to that next level of studies at university. I'm gonna stop this share, but everything we looked at is going to be linked in this slideshow. So I should be able to send it to everyone who signed up. Any other questions? We will look at poetry on Wednesday for the final session. Do you have any questions or thoughts about poetry? Has anyone taught poetry? Has anyone tried it in lessons? Yes. Karen.
Hello. Well, we usually go through the outline of like as a part of Maturita exam, the students should have or should cover the big names in American poetry. So we usually read both Raven, or I let the students put it in their way. Like, for example, we have like groups, and each of the group may read the poem or perform the poem in their own way. So some of the students rap, some of the students just read, some of the students sing or whatever. So but it's like the classics of American poetry, like Poe and Whitman, and other names, Emma Dickinson, and some more. But actually, I'm sure that there are like modern authors of whom, like, I'm not very aware of the names. So maybe I would appreciate to give us some ideas, for something more appealing than the old, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. First of all, that sounds wonderful. I would love to be in your class. It sounds great to have different options of how to perform or interact with a poem. I think that's a really good idea. And yeah, doing the classics is wonderful. We will talk about that a bit on Wednesday. And I will also try to bring some more modern examples. And also, we'll talk a bit about different forms maybe. So if you don't feel like you can jump into teaching Walt Whitman, we can look at some different forms like haiku or limerick that less advanced students can also participate with. But that's great. I'm excited. Thank you.
Well, thank you,
Any?
Celeste, very much. This was great. And I really encourage you all to participate in the final lesson of the course on Wednesday. It will be at 3:30, so please, 3:30 on Wednesday. And I hope everyone received my reminder earlier today about the lesson today. Katerina is nodding. That's great. Karin is nodding as well. So I hope you did receive it, because I noticed that some people joined around 3:30 today, which was a little bit confusing. But yes, Wednesday it's going to be 3:30. So please make your time. It's going to be the final lesson with Celeste.
Yes, and if you have any questions in general about writing, it doesn't have to be poetry related, just bring those on Wednesday and we should have some time for general discussion.
Thank you very much, Celeste. And as usually, please give us an evaluation of the lesson today. I loved it. I think it was super useful. Great. Karin loved it as well. Thank you for that feedback. So see you on Wednesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye.